there will still be folks joining us for the next little while. I'm Terry MacArthur. I'm with the Woodlands Township Environmental Services Department. It's my great privilege to act as the volunteer coordinator for our department. And as such, it's been just such a pleasure to work with both master naturalists of the Heartwood chapter here in Montgomery Walker counties, as well as a wonderful group of township residents who have really made the commitment and gotten involved in helping with monitoring and control of invasives along some of the pathways here in the township. So, I mean, I see lots of familiar names in this list this morning. Carolyn Longlinay, who you heard speak just a minute ago, is our behind-the-scenes tech person this morning. She's we couldn't have gotten this organized without her, so shout out to her and all the master naturalists who've been involved in this program so far, and I know will be in the future. I'm going to ask you, if you would, as soon as you get that chat box open, would you please type in the boxes at the very bottom where you type? Would you please type in your name and what organization you're representing? If you're not representing an organization, but you're a resident of the township, would you please put in what village you live in, Alden Bridge, Cochran's Crossing, Grogan's Mill, whatever your village is, would you please put that in so we can get a sense of where people are? And if you happen to be here from out of this greater Houston Woodlands area and you're just here to learn more about the program, would you say where you're from in that chat box so that once again we can get an idea of where everyone is in this. If you're from out of town and you're interested in starting a program such as we're running here jointly between the Township Environmental Services and the Master Naturalist chapter, and you would like any assistance with that, in addition to Dr. Landell, I welcome you to reach out to me. If you're on here, you've probably gotten 10 emails from me by now, so you know how to reach me. Please just contact me if you have any interest in knowing how to get a program working. As I said earlier, that chat box is how you'll enter questions for Dr. Landell. He'll take a couple of breaks. I'm asking you to only ask questions about the content that he presents until the first Q&A break, and save any plant-specific questions until after that break. So it'll be easier for us to answer as many plant questions as possible toward the end of the class today. So wait till after that first Q&A break if you have plant-specific questions. And Dr. Landell also is going to share some resources with you that you can learn more about plant ID and specific plants as we go along. You'll all be, as I said earlier, so won't be surprised to those just joining, you'll all be muted, and we'll shut down all the video here, Carolyn, in just a second, so that there are no distractions to the presenter or on our part, so we can pay close attention to the presenter. I wanted to tell you that the task force here in the Woodlands that's made up of local master naturalists as well as residents of the township, they have remained very active and involved even while we've all been forced to stay home, primarily under the terrific leadership of Kathy Herrick, who is one of our master naturalists, but she has been so dedicated and committed to this program that since January, the first couple of months, we could all get out there on the trail and work. But you may be surprised that since January till now, that group is still averaging just over 100 hours a month in volunteer service in monitoring and control of invasive species. So kudos to Kathy and those regulars who are showing up to help. We're working in very small groups right now, trying to keep the group size limited to about 10 so they can spread out along the pathway where they're working and keep that distance between one another. But nonetheless, I mean, I'm just flabbergasted at the work they are doing, and as I say, averaging out just over 100 hours a month since January. I'll remind you again, if you have questions, you've gotten multiple emails from me, just reach out to me, and I am more than happy for you to ask questions or get more information. And if you want to work, tomorrow is a work day here in the township. If you want to join Kathy and her crew working tomorrow, you got an email from me with how to contact her. But if you need that information again, just ding me with an email and I'll send it right back to you this afternoon so that you can contact Kathy and join in that work day tomorrow if you want. Last reminder, please, in the chat box, open your chat box. If you weren't here when I said it earlier, if you hover your mouse toward the bottom of the screen, you can see the chat box icon. Click on that, and when the panel opens, the message bar where you type is at the very bottom of the chat box. Please put in your name and what organization you represent, or if you're a township resident, not part of an organization, please tell me what village you're in, just so we get a sense of where people are from. And if you're from out of the Houston Woodlands area, would you please say where you're from? So without any further ado, let's get started. I'm just so thrilled and pleased to introduce to you once again Dr. Hans Landl from Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center. He's the director of the Invasives of Texas program there. He has been so generous of his time and knowledge over these past few years to help get this program started here in our area. It's his support and his knowledge that he shared that's enabled us to do the work we've done. And right at the very end, we'll address those plant questions, and if you have any questions for me. But for now, I think we've got enough people here that it's time for us to go ahead and get started. So Carolyn, if you will pass this over to Dr. Landl, and everyone please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. All right, I hope everybody can hear me. I know my microphone is unmuted, so that should be good. I'm going to share my screen now. In the meantime, I'll tell you that, yes, I've been working at the Wildflower Center for, finishing up my 5th year. I actually started out there as a volunteer, and I've been working at this program here since. I'm actually leaving the program at the end of this month, and one of our participants here, Ashley Morgan Olvera, is going to be taking over for that. So she is actually listening in right now. So today we're going to be talking about lots of things, but we're going to focus on what's called the Sentinel Pest Network. So this workshop is to focus you on that program, and also, of course, as part of that, to introduce you to invasive species and what it is that you can do. So there we go. So let's go through our objectives here. The first one is I want to provide you with some background information on invasive species. I want to introduce you to the Sentinel Pest Network. I want to train you on reporting Sentinel Pest Network species. We're barely going to touch on that. We don't really have time to talk about that. Provide you some identification training for some of these Sentinel Pest Network species, and also for some other species as well that are local to you. And the whole idea here is that this will empower you to be able to begin to help in the fight against invasive species. So we'll talk about how you might be able to do that. Now, one of the first things we need to do is talk about, well, what is an invasive species in the first place? And we are going to use the federal definition, which is a species that is non-native or alien to the ecosystem under consideration and whose likely introduction causes or is likely to cause economic or environmental harm or harm to human health. So there's 2 aspects that are important there. One is that The species is non-native, it did not evolve in that area. And secondly, that it causes some type of harm. So that's what we're looking at. It's important to recognize that there are lots and lots of non-natives that are now present in North America that, as far as we can tell, are not causing any harm. For example, in your garden, you may have several non-natives that are there, non-native species of plants, but they're not invasive. They don't spread. They don't wander off someplace. So you might have roses, for example, or something like that, that don't cause any problems. But it's that very small proportion, 2 to 5%, of invasive species that cause all the big problems. And that's what we're worried about. So one of those ways that impact can occur is on our natural heritage. And you have, I'm sure, thought about this. I'm sure if I asked you what sorts of problems can invasive species cause to the environment, you'd come up with those. But remember, there are other ways that invasive species can cause problems. They can cause problems with recreation, with human health, with industry, forestry, and agriculture. And all of these together can cause economic impact. So what are some of the environmental impacts? I'm just going to give you a list here where you don't have time to talk about all of these or even any of them, barely. But these are some of the impacts that can occur. So starting at the individual level, we can get genetic and individual impacts. So if we get a hybridization between a non-native invasive species and its native, closely related, that hybridization can occur, then that hybrid that occurs or is produced is, of course, not a native either. Excuse me. And then you have to also remember that the native has lost a reproductive opportunity by hybridizing with this non-native. We get lots and lots of different kinds of impacts on the population level. So there's competition and predation, nutritional problems, physical problems, meaning that, for example, zebra mussels can grow on the outside of freshwater clams, which keeps them from opening. And if they can't open, they can't do gas exchange and they can't feed. And then there are also diseases. So all these impacts can be occurring. And that's going to affect population sizes, right? The number of individuals in a population of our native species. That can lead to impacts in the community level. So the composition of species in the community can change. We often get lower biodiversity, especially if you have an invasive plant or an animal that outcompetes and therefore replaces other natives. We get changes in the interactions among the different species in the community, and we can even get extinctions. And that, all of these together, can also then lead to impacts on the ecosystem and how the ecosystem functions. So we get changes in fire regimes, how often and how intense fires occur. Soil health can change, hydrology can change, erosional impacts can change, and the nutrient impacts on aquatic systems can all change. These are all environmental impacts. One example I'll give you with this plant that you guys have around there, which is Chinese privet, Ligustrum sinensis. These are all impacts that this species has on the environment. All right, and these are either documented in the literature or just plain old common sense. Like, for example, replacing natives where this plant is growing, there's no native that's going to grow there. So that's just common sense. But some of these other things like changes in soil chemistry, nutrient cycling, soil arthropod community, et cetera, those impacts have been discovered by research. So as you can see, there's a wide range of impacts that an invasive plant could have. We can also have economic harms. So here's a list of various types of harm or impacts on the economy that can occur. For example, you see there that there's an individual inside a water intake area, and that individual is power washing zebra mussels out of there. And so that needs to be done periodically, and of course it takes money to do that. There are also problems with human health. For example, some new plants that might come in may bring in new pollen, and so people that did not have allergies before might have allergies. And as far as injury and disease isn't concerned, I always like to ask, how many of you have not been stung by the red imported fire ant? And because we are managing these species with pesticides and herbicides, we also have to think about those impacts as well. Try to minimize them, of course, but still they are a problem. And then we have these social and recreational problems. If you got a lake that is covered over with giant salvinia or hydrilla, or is full of hydrilla or something like that, you can't do sport fishing anymore. You can't go boating. If you have zebra mussel shells that are strewn across the beach, you can't walk barefoot on there anymore. So all those activities can all be impacted by invasive species. So my summary slide here is this one here. This is a pond that's covered with giant salvinia, which is a floating fern. It's a big problem there in East Texas, so many of you have already heard about it. It's one of the species we'd like you to keep an eye out for. This can cover the whole surface, and it shades out the plankton, the phytoplankton, the microscopic photosynthetic algae that forms the basis of the ecosystem in this pond, in pond ecosystems, pond and lake ecosystems. And if it's getting rid of those photosynthetic algae, then the whole food web collapses. So it turns this place into a desert. Plus, decomposition that occurs uses up the oxygen, so the lake and pond become deoxygenated, so not much can live underneath under there. So even if these fisher people, his father and son, wanted to fish, even if they could get their hook in there, there's nothing there to catch anyway. So they're losing their recreational opportunity, and if they're not going to come back, the local economy is not getting their money either. So this slide summarizes all of those impacts. Another slide I have to show that impact is this one here. This is a street. This picture is a street in Ohio, and 3 years later it looked like this because of emerald ash borer. So that damage obviously is tremendous. Emerald ash borer has caused billions of dollars of damage actually, and destroyed literally hundreds of millions of trees in North America. So remember that these trees that are dead, the city has to spend money to cut those down and then spend money to replant, as do the local homeowners and landowners. They need to do the same things. So lots and lots of damage that these species can cause, these invasive species can cause. Therefore, we try to control and treat and manage and monitor for them to try to minimize their impact and keep them from spreading. And that is, of course, an overwhelming task. It makes it really difficult for, say, government entities to do their part to try to manage these. So one way to expand their capabilities is to enlist the public, to enlist you, so that we have citizen scientists and volunteers like yourselves stepping in and helping out with our management and monitoring of invasive species. And that's a lot of what today is all about. Telling you how you can take action. So what is it that you can do? Well, you can learn to identify invasive species, right? These two programs, the Invaders of Texas Citizen Science Program and the Sentinel Pest Network Citizen Science Program, both of those teach you how to do that. You can learn to report invasive species when you see them. Well, these two programs, again, teach you how to do that. You can prevent the spread of invasive species. How can you do that? Well, again, the Sentinel Pest Network Science Program tells you how you might be able to do that. And you can help remove invasive species. And you can do that by joining your local Master Naturalist group, your Native Plant Society of Texas group, or any other organization such as the Woodlands Invasive Task Force to help manage our natural areas and remove these invasive species. Or if you have them on your property, then you certainly should consider removing them and perhaps replacing them with native species. So what we're going to talk about today has to do with the Sentinel Pest Citizen Science Program. So that's why I've highlighted those there. If you're interested in the Woodlands Invasive Task Force, you need to contact Terry MacArthur. This is her contact information there. Oops, Terry, sorry, I spelled your first name wrong. Sorry about that. I did not catch that. In any case, this is her information, and she can always give it out later for those of you who need it. You can contact the township of Woodlands also to get a hold of her. Okay, so let's take a step forward in taking action and talk about how we can stop the spread of invasives. That's one big thing that we can do. They move around a lot because of us. We aid in their spread. We do a lot of things that can move them around. So we can help prevent the spread by cleaning and drying our watercraft and water equipment. Don't move firewood, remove seeds from boots and clothes when you're hiking, and of course, plant natives. These are all ways that we can help help stop the spread of invasive species. So one of the things that we're doing here when we talk about stopping the spread is it means preventing their dispersal, right? Keeping them from moving from one place to another. One way to do that is to, or not one way, but I look at this as being a two-pronged approach: early detection and then preventing transport in the first place. We're going to talk about early detection, and that has to do, whoops, there we go. That has to do with actually trying to find these organisms and finding them when there are very few of them. So one way we can keep them from spreading is by detecting them early and then managing them, getting rid of them so that they can't spread any further. And one way we can do that is by trapping. So this blue box, triangular box there, is a trap for emerald ash borer. So it particularly looks for those. We can do monitoring. Monitoring means going out and specifically looking for invasive species. And being vigilant simply means knowing what to look for and just keeping your eyes open. So if you happen to run across something, you can report it. And that is what we are talking about today. The training that you're going through today has to do with the vigilance. And the program that we have to teach you to be vigilant is the Sentinel Pest Network. The Sentinel Pest Network is what we call an early detection and rapid response system. So the idea is to train you guys to be vigilant for these species, to be able to identify these species that are called, we call them species of high regulatory significance. You send in a report, we send that to the experts if it's actually what we think it is. If it is a problem species, those experts get out there as soon as they can to try to manage that species so it does not spread anymore. So it's really important that we get your help, because the more eyes we have out in the field, the more likely it is we'll find these. What is a pest of high regulatory significance? This is from the APHIS PPQ. APHIS is the Animal Plant and Health Inspection Service of the USDA, and the Plant Protection Quarantine division of APHIS. This is their definition. Pests of high regulatory significance include plant pests that can create an economic impact on the nation's natural resources and agriculture, such as those that we see, those examples that are down there. And why are we doing this in Texas? We're doing it in Texas because we're huge. There are 9 ecoregions, which means there are 9 general different kind of habitats. That diversity in habitats increases the probability that something can actually come here and cause problems. We have all this border, including with Mexico, so there's lots of opportunity for somebody to come in and bring one of these pests in with us. We have lots of partners, of course, USDA APHIS, TexasInvasives.org, my program with the Invaders of Texas, and the Sentinel Pest Network, and then these other organizations, and of course, importantly, you, right? We are asking you to partner with us. Now, I'm going to teach you today how to identify some of these species. We don't have time to cover them all, so you're going to have to spend some time learning how to identify the rest of them. However, a big part, obviously, of this program is for you to report something when you think you found something. We don't have time today to talk about it. Normally in our 3-hour workshop, we talk about how to do this. However, you did get a handout. You did get a document that tells you how to do that. And there are 2 ways to do that. You can either do it online or you can use our mobile app to do that. And importantly, there's no login that's required for that. You just go ahead online and you go to texasinvasives.org. You go click on the Take Action tab, and then you click on the Report It tab, and then you choose the species that you want to report, and you fill out the form. On the mobile app, you simply tap on the Report It tile, choose the species that you want, and report on it. It's as simple as that. If you have any questions, you can ask me about that in the question period. I will warn you though, right now, unfortunately, the app doesn't work. We are in the process of trying to figure out why it doesn't work. So unfortunately, you can't use it right now. You can use it to look up species. So those two tiles at the top in the home of the app on the home screen, that brings you to information about invasive species and each individual species, but you can't do any reporting with that mobile app at the moment, unfortunately. But at least you have instructions about how to do it. Okay, let's stop here for questions. Anybody have any questions? If you have questions, go ahead, tap them into the chat box.
I have one question already, Hans,
Sure.
from one of our attendees. He was asking if the hybrids might be controlled by the same methods we'd use to eradicate the native species itself.
You mean the invasive species itself?
No, he said the hybrid organisms.
Yes.
But then he asked if they could be used, if they could be controlled by the methods used on the native species.
I don't know why we would be controlling the native species, but it is possible, certainly possible, that whatever method that we're using to control the non-native invasive, it could also work on the hybrid. But because it's a hybrid, it may not. The other thing to recognize is since they're hybridizing, they're closely related, right? That means it makes it much more difficult to control the non-native without also affecting the native. So for example, we wouldn't be able to use a biocontrol agent. And whatever herbicide, for example, if we're talking about a plant, whatever herbicide that's going to affect the non-native is also going to affect the native, since they're so closely related. So it just makes it much more difficult.
Yes.
Yeah.
So another question we had is, even though the app is not working, can we still report using the online webpage?
Oh my goodness, yes, I should have said that. Thank you. Yes, definitely. Yeah, we definitely want you to do that. Yeah.
Someone else asked, can the pages in the species database be printed out as a book?
They cannot. There are 200 and something species, so you'd have a huge book. But what you can do on each page, on each profile, you can, at the very top, there's kind of a little hidden link, hidden only because it's small, that allows you, if you click on that link, it says print the worksheet or the information sheet or something, then that will give you a web page of that information for that particular species, and you can print it out.
Perfect.
All right. So right now, that printed page, depending on the profile that you're looking at, some of the profiles we've updated with additional information and photos and stuff. Right now, that printed page will not have that information, but it'll have all the basic information. That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that. That's a good question. Yes, you can print those profiles out.
I have a question that on my property, I do have invasive vines growing, and I'm wondering how to eradicate them.
Yeah, let's hold that question till the end, and we'll talk about that.
All right.
Make sure to ask me again, though. I'll forget.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That was it for questions, Hans.
Oh, very good. You guys are good. All right. So let's now start talking about the individual species. That's what we're going to be talking about for the rest of the time here, pretty much, is each of these sentinel pest network species. So as I said, and as Terry mentioned, we will not be able to cover all of the 24 sentinel pest network species that are on the Sentinel Pest Network species list. but there are ways that you can get information about how to identify those species and other problem invasive species that we have in our area. And this is where you can look. HARC, the Houston Area Research Center, helped put out a booklet called The Quiet Invasion. So you can get hard copies of that from HARC. I think Terry has them too. You can get them from her. But you can also go to that website, galvbayinvasives.org, and that's the digital version of it. And there's a large number of species that are on that list, not just the Sentinel Pest Network ones, but all the ones. And what's nice for you is that these are regional, right? It covers the lower Galveston Bay watershed and upper Texas coast. So a lot of the species are in there. It would be useful for you guys. The other place to look at it, look for up information on individual species, as I just mentioned, is texasinvasive.org. And you go to our online, onto that website, and then up in the upper right corner is the invasives database. You click on that and then do a search. Use the search functions to find what you're looking for. And as I mentioned, on the mobile app, you can look at much of that same information on the mobile app right in your pocket. It's pretty cool. Okay. Now, I'm going to now move to the Sentinel Pest Network species. I'm going to start out with what we call the original Dirty Dozen. So when we first started the Sentinel Pest Network program, we started out with just the dozen. And we are now up to twice as many as that. So these are them. We are not going to be able to go over all of these, but you should have worked through your worksheet, so you have some idea about some information about some of these species. This is where some of them are located. So notice that some of them are in Texas now. Actually, Kogan grass is in Texas now. So that's where the original Dirty Dozen were, and originally none of them were in Texas, and we wanted to keep them out. So let's go through some of our 24 species. This is now the point. This is where it gets interactive, ladies and gentlemen. So please get out your worksheet and your pencil or paper or pen, and your job is to follow along, and I'll give you time to answer some of these questions on your worksheet as we move along. So I'll give you a minute to rifle around, run around in your kitchen and find, where did I put that worksheet? Oh my goodness, where did I put it? So you can have it in front of you. So what is it? Well, there's nothing on here. I'm going to give you some clues, and then you fill in on your worksheet. I'm going to ask you, I'm going to put a clue up, and you're supposed to tell me how many species out of the 24 on the list match that clue. So here's the first clue. How many species are aquatic on the list? So the species that I'm going to talk about is aquatic. Go ahead and count them up. All right. So you should have gotten 5. There are 5 aquatic species. All right. Out of those aquatic species, out of those 5, how many of them are plants? And for that, by my count, it should be 3. How many of those plants are rooted with floating leaves? Should be 2. You should have thrown out giant salvinia. How many of those, how many of those are flowering plants? So should be both of them, right? Both of them are flowering plants. That's just to remind you that the one you threw out already, the giant salvinia, is a fern, which is not a flowering plant. Out of those 2, which of them have cordate leaves? That means heart-shaped. Well, both of them do. Because they're very closely related. The species is either, the one I'm talking about, is either yellow or crested floating heart. So it's a floating heart. It's called a floating heart, duh, because the leaves look like hearts. They're cordate shaped. One is either yellow or crested. So these are species that we are very worried about. They are in East Texas. They're not very common, and we want to keep them that way. So these are ones that you definitely want to keep your eyes out for and definitely want to report. either using our reporting system or contacting Texas Parks and Wildlife and tell them about it. So what do these two look like? Well, of course, they're closely related. So they both have those rounded heart-shaped floating leaves. However, the yellow floating heart has all opposite leaves, and the crested floating heart has alternate leaves. Okay. Also, in the crested floating heart, you notice that the edges are often tinged with purple. You might be able to see here that you can see that purple tinge around the edge of the leaves there, which this one does not have. Okay. You'll also notice that, oh, no, never mind. Okay. So interestingly here, see, it says unequal in size. So see, that leaf is smaller than that leaf. So these ones are opposite. They come from the same spot on the stem, but one is larger than the other, which is kind of interesting. So here's yellow floating heart. Here's a leaf, and here you can see the reddish border there. Also, by these people holding the leaves, you get a feeling for how large the leaves are. They're not very big. They don't get really big. Not like, say, oh, what's it called? Lily pads, American lily. Also, the crested floating heart has these, they call them tuberous propagules. So they're like little tubers, and they're called propagules because they can break off, land in the soil down in the bottom, and start a new plant, which is one of the ways that it spreads. Okay, so if you turn it over and you find that, then you have crested floated heart. And of course, once they flower, it's easier to tell because they have, both of them have 5 petals. The yellow floating heart, has yellow flowers, and the crested one has white. The yellow floating heart has these ruffles around the edges, and the crested floating heart, it's got white, like I said. It's hard to tell here, but these right here are ridges that are actually down the middle. They look like maybe they're on the edge, but they're down the very middle top side of the petal. So for example, here's the petal here, and right down the middle is this crest that's up. So that's why it's called the crested floating heart. So that's what you're looking for. So that's how you tell those, that's how you identify those. If you find any one of those, you definitely need to report those. All right, the next one. What is it? What is my favorite color? All right, so this one is an animal. So how many species on our list are animals? You should have gotten 15. So there are a lot of them, right? All right. How many of them, of those animals, how many of them don't have legs? You should have come up with 3. How many of those 3 are large? Should still be 3. No, what do we got? Yes. All right. How many of them have a shell? That's correct, 2. So the animal I'm thinking of is either the giant African land snail or the apple snail. Both of them are large, as you can tell by the hands there. Both of them have shells. Only one of them, well, I'll get to that, but these are the 2. So these are the 2 species I want to talk about. Which one of these is aquatic? The giant African land snail or the apple snail? There's a clue in the photographs. Yes, it's the apple snail, or at least if you didn't know this is the apple snail, it's this one here. So what that tells you is that that is the apple snail there. So on our left is the giant African land snail, and on our right is the apple snail. All right. So how else can you tell them apart besides the habitat? Well, look at the shell and look at the coloration. What are the differences that you see here? One thing you should notice is that the moon snail's shell is compact, whereas the one for the African land snail is elongated, right? It's pointy, very long and pointy. The other thing to notice is that in the apple snail, the coloration, it's hard to tell here, but a lot of the coloration tends to go across from side to side. Whereas see on here, you have the striping that runs all the way up and down the shell. That's a real big difference between the two. So certainly the shape is a big indicator. The habitat's a big indicator. And the coloration is another indicator. The other thing is that if you look on your sheet there, if you did your homework, you'll see that the land snail is not in Texas yet, whereas the apple snail is quite prominent. It's very common in your area down there. All right, and which of these two species produces these eggs here? Correct, the apple snail. So if you see these, then you definitely know that a pond is infested with apple snails. To deal with these, you should crush them. Don't scrape them into the water, because they may still be viable and they may then start hatching in there. So the best thing to do actually is just to crush them. Get rid of them that way. Okay, so that's it for either one of these. And again, for either one of these, they're on the list, so they are reportable. You need to report them if you find them. Okay, here's the next species. So the question is, what is this? So the first question I'm going to ask you is this a plant or an animal? Of course it's an animal. What kind of animal? Hopefully you said an insect. Yes, this is an insect. Well, okay, well, what type of insect is it? And in particular, these are our choices because these are the choices that occur on our list. I've inadvertently given you a little hint here. It's a beetle. So this organism over here is a beetle, okay? A coleopteran, member of the order Coleoptera. All right, given that, which one of these two beetles is this animal here? And it's probably obvious because this is just a darkened version of that. Yes, so that's the soapberry borer, and that's the emerald ash borer. Okay, so they look very similar. The reason they look very similar is they're both in the same family. They're both buprestids. And buprestids have this very sleek look to them. They're kind of flat, rounded head, kind of hunched shoulders here. The soapberry borer is a little pointed off the end there. But they all kind of look like this. That's why you might get confused just by looking at this silhouette. You won't know which one you have. But clearly, if you look at the pictures, you know which you have. One's bright green and one isn't. So the soapberry borer, dark metallic green, dark metallic black to slightly green. And of course, the emerald ash borer is the emerald green. The soapberry borer, it's important to note, it has these 4 white dots on the elytra. The elytra is the hard outer wing that all beetles have. So its outer wings on the surface there have those 4 white dots. And of course, the emerald ash borer doesn't have that. The soapberry borer is up to 1/2 inch long, and the emerald ash borer is about 1/2 inch long. So the soapberry borer can be just a little bit smaller than the emerald ash borer. So that's how you can, well, obviously the color you can tell them apart, but size-wise, that's it. And if that doesn't help you in terms of size, this emerald ash borer sitting on a penny, that kind of gives you an idea as to how big these beetles are. All right, so how do we distinguish the emerald ash borer from other similar beetles? And there are other similar beetles that are green. A lot of them, there are several in Texas that are green, but they're larger and they don't look like this. They're not the same shape, right? They're completely different shape. so they don't have that buprested shape. So size and shape are really important. And the other thing is, if you do see something that's about the same size, then what you need to look for is underneath the wings. If you look at the top of the abdomen, that surface of the abdomen is coppery red, and nothing else has that. Okay, that's what you'd be looking for. Okay, now what about the soapberry borer? Let me ask you this. Is this a soapberry borer? All right, so okay, so you've made your decision. Think to yourself, or write down in the notes section there on your worksheet, why do you think it is or is not? Okay. It turns out it is not. Here's the soapberry borer. To compare the two. All right. This is a native lookalike. It's another soapberry borer. So that's important, right? Because both of these could be found on soapberry. You might find this one and say, hey, wait a minute, that's a soapberry borer. But it's not, because as you can see, it's got a lot more white on it, more white spots, and then the underneath is white as well. And even the shape is a little different. See, it's contracted here in that part of the animal, and the head is not quite the same. It's also a bit smaller. It's only 2/10 of an inch. And remember, this one at the smallest, the soapberry borer, is about 1/3 of an inch, 0.3. So this one is smaller. But as I said, you might come across both of them on a either one of them on a soapberry tree. But that's how you can tell those two apart. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about the emerald ash borer. So how else can you identify it? You can identify the larva. So the way that both of these, they're borers, and so they bore into the trunk of the tree or some stem, and the larvae feed on the living tissue under the bark. And that's how they actually kill the tree, end up killing the tree. So the larvae for both of these species will be under the bark, and the only way to find them would be to peel back the bark. If you do peel them back and you see the larvae in there, the way you identify emerald ash borer larvae is by the fact that they have these 10 bell-shaped segments. That's important. See how bell-shaped they are? Even in the younger ones. And when they're young, they're not big yet, so they don't have 10 segments yet, but they still have the bell-shaped segments. That's going to be really the important thing to look for. So most of the time, you're not going to see the adult. So what you're actually looking for are signs and symptoms that a tree is infested. That's usually how we figure out that they are around here someplace, if we don't catch them in traps. The first thing to look for is for canopy dieback, as you see in these trees. Canopy's starting to die. And remember, these are ash trees, right? The emerald ash borer only attacks ashes. So if the ash tree is starting to lose its leaves across at the top, then that's that's when you need to worry, and you can even just report that. Now, because the tree is losing these leaves up here, it starts to put out these what are called epicormic branches down at the bottom or somewhere up the stem. It's trying to survive, so it's putting out more branches. And these leaves there tend to be much larger than normal. And then, because there's an infestation in the tree, the adults eventually come out of the tree, and they produce these D-shaped holes, so flat on one side. So you would look for those in the ash borer, in the ash. That's not always easy to find, one, because you can tell they're tiny, and secondly, they may be infesting up high where you never see them. Now, if the infestation gets fairly large, then the bark will start to split because the insect has fed and killed the living bark underneath, which separates the outer dead bark from the inner part of the tree. The other thing that's important is that these galleries, that's what we call it, where the individual was feeding, they're sinuous, right? They're snake-shaped, snaky. They go back and forth and back and forth. And that is very characteristic. So if you peel back the bark and you see that, then yes, you have an emerald ash borer infested tree. And then finally, because you have these larvae underneath that are feeding there, and woodpeckers, like that's what they're feeding on, you'll see woodpecker damage on the tree. So even if there's an infestation up high, you might see a lot of woodpecker damage on the bark as they're trying to get to to the larva underneath. So those are symptoms that you're looking for. If you see those symptoms, you want to report those symptoms, okay? Because as I said, it's more likely you're going to see the symptoms than the animal itself. Okay, the soapberry borer, same types of signs and symptoms because the larva underneath, feeding underneath the bark, so you can get the bark to start fall apart. But they kill the tree quite rapidly, actually. It can be within a year that they'll kill the tree, whereas it might take 3 years or 4 years, depending on how large the tree is and how big the infestation is, that an ash gets killed. But same thing, you'll get bark chips at the bottom because the woodpeckers are trying to get at them. And also the bark just falls away because the animals are killing the bark. So as it says here, the infested tree is doomed. You can't do anything about it. You have to mulch it and cut it down. But these are the symptoms that you're looking for. Again, die back towards the top, and then these sorts of symptoms on the soapberry tree. So you get, these are apicormic branches here. So these branches are coming out. The tree, the actual branches, normal branches are up here, but it's starting to put these out because those are dying out there. And again, you get the D-shaped exit holes because this is a buprestid, and that's what is common for them. So if you see any of those symptoms, you got to report. All right, the next species, just wondering if anybody happens to know what this is. What type of insect out of that list of the insects that we had before, what type of this, and how many of those type of insects are on our list? So you should have gotten beetle or coleopteran, and there are 5 of them on our list. Anybody have an idea what this is? You already know what it isn't. You know which beetles it's not because we've covered them already. So it just gives you 3 other ones to guess. And one of the keys here is that right there, the long antenna. And do you think that this is found in Texas? The answer to that is no. This species is the Asian longhorn beetle. It's called it's a member of the longhorn beetle family because it has these very long antennae. Okay. It's only found in the Northeast. Fortunately, it's been successfully eradicated in some places, but it's still up there. Although it's that far away, we're still worried that it could come to Texas because we have the habitat for it. It would have no problem surviving down here. So that's why we need to keep our eyes open for it. The other reason is that it attacks lots and lots of different kinds of trees, more than 15 host trees, including species that we have here in Texas. How do we identify it? Again, these very long antennae, right? Longer than the insect's body. And importantly, they are banded, black and white. The animal itself is pretty much dark black with these white spots on it. And the white spot pattern can be variable. Not can be variable, it is variable if you compare those two, right? So there's no specific pattern necessarily, but there is a lot of spotting that occurs. They may have blue feet, but they may not. The length is 1 to 1.5 inches. So these are large, right? These are large insects. So that's what you're looking for. Around in Texas, we have one species. It's also a longhorn beetle that people get confused with the Asian longhorn beetle, and that's the cottonwood borer. Okay, so this is another boring beetle. Actually, so is the longhorn beetle. But obviously it likes cottonwood, and you can see why people might get them confused because it's black and white. But the pattern is very different, right? This is a pattern of blotches, right? Whereas this one, in the Asian longhorn beetle, we have spots. Very different between the two. And also notice that the antennae are a bit shorter, and also they are not banded in the cottonwood borer. And I'm putting this up here because this is the species that I get reports on in Texas. Thankfully, people know enough about the Asian longhorn beetle that they're looking out for a beetle that's large and black and white. And they send me these and they wonder whether this is it. And it's not. So if you see this, you don't have to report it. However, I will tell you, for all these species, if you're not sure, if you're the least bit not sure, go ahead and report it. Let us decide whether or not it is what it is. We'd rather you send in an identification of something that is not what it is rather than miss something, miss one of these important species. Okay, so a little more information about the Asian longhorn beetle and the signs and symptoms. It's a big beetle, so the exit holes are going to be large, right? That's 1/2 inch, right? The emerald ash borer was only about that big, like 3 millimeters or something. Now, because they're in there and feeding, the sawdust frass just means insect poop. So that's getting pushed out the holes here. And then, of course, they're feeding. They have these insect galleries. So if you pull back the bark, you'll see that the larvae are feeding under there. The larvae are not particularly, there's nothing distinctive about them. They look like typical beetle larvae, which means fat and white and long. But that's about it. So you're looking for that. And of course, you're looking for the tree dying. Okay. So if you have a tree dying, there's lots of things that could be doing it, including native organisms, but you should report it or contact an arborist to come take a look, and they can always tell whether or not there's an infestation going on. All right, that's it for the Asian longhorn beetle. For the next one, this is one that's been in the news a lot, say the last about 5 years, but many of you probably have not heard about it. This is an animal. What type of animal? Well, by now you should all recognize this as an insect. It's got six legs, 1, 2, 3, one in the back. Here's the fourth, and then the fifth one, and the sixth one's in the back. So this is an insect. This is called the spotted lanternfly. It's called the lanternfly because it's like a lantern. It's hard to tell maybe here, but you see that red under there? The underwing there has red in it. You'll see that later. So it's like there's a flame within a lantern in there. So it belongs to the lanternfly family, not surprisingly. Right now, so again, only found in the Northeast. It was only been there since 2014, and they're trying to keep it there. So the big push right now to keep it from spreading, because it could end up actually in most of the United States. Everywhere except this part of the country, it could end up living. So we're trying to keep it from going there. And why is that? We were worried about it because it attacks agricultural, we know from other places in the world it attacks agricultural crops. Over 70 known host plants, but these are things that we're worried about. In Texas, we're really worried about it coming in, attacking our grapes and therefore our wine industry. The other important thing about it, and the reason that we're worried about it here in Texas, is that it tends to prefer a non-native invasive tree of heaven, which is also found in Texas. It's an invasive species. It's also a reporting species for us, for the Invaders of Texas volunteers. But it's found in at least 43 countries. So every county's here, sorry. So in every county here that you see, that's where the tree of heaven has been reported. Now, of course, it probably occurs in a lot more different areas because this tree, the tree of heaven, has been planted. It's an ornamental tree. It's in people's yards. So it's probably in lots of other places. So here is Travis County. And of course, out to the west of us is wine country. So you notice that the tree of heaven exists out there. That means that that tree is out there and can provide a foothold for the spotted lanternfly to end up into Texas. So it's very likely that it could appear here. At least, you know, it has the opportunity to survive here. So that's why we're really worried about it. This gives you an idea about the size. It's about 1 inch long. So it's fairly large. In the Northeast, you get big infestations. So here's a huge group of them. Lots of pictures you can find of that many of them. And then this is the wing. This is the adult with the wings extended. So you can see the red underwings that you see underneath here. These are what are called hemipterans. So they're true bugs. And so they don't go through the typical, well, it's not really that typical, but the most recognizable life cycle that people learn, which is what the butterfly goes through, which is the egg, the larva, the pupa, and the adult. These guys go just through what's called the nymph stage. So these guys look like just smaller unwinged versions of adults, and they get bigger and bigger through each instar. And once they get to the later stages, they turn red. But they start out black like this. And they are pretty tiny when they first start out. Once they get to close to being turning into an adult, then of course they'll be about adult size. So that's what you're looking for, this black thing with spots on it. And notice the body shape. It's kind of roundish and compact, right? Some of you may have seen ladybird beetle larvae, and they can be black with spots on them, but they're very long, very elongated. They look like, people sometimes call them little dragons. So this is what you're looking for. And these are what cause a lot of the damage because they have piercing mouth parts and they feed on plant juices. Okay, so the next one is here's the next one. Again, what kind of insect is this? You should have said moth or a lepidopteran in general. This is the cactus moth. It's native to Argentina. It was it got into the Caribbean and from there into Florida and is now moving along the coast. The blue spots there kind of indicate where prickly pear occur in the United States, which is what it feeds on. And it is now present. Just 2 years ago, it was discovered in South Texas, which is close enough to you guys to keep an eye out for. It feeds only on opuntia and especially the prickly pear. So if you got prickly pear around there, it might show up on that. The females lay eggs on these egg sticks, and they lay them on the spines like that. And it's important to recognize that that's not one whole one egg. Each one of these little pancakes in the stick is one egg. Each of those will hatch, the larva will crawl down and then enter the pad at the base of the spine there after about 2 to 3 weeks. And in there they feed communally, right? Because all those eggs hatch and they all end up in there. They start out more black, but they quickly, as they mature and go through different instars, they turn into this red color, and these black spots in the last instar, those black spots become bands. But nothing else looks like this. If you find this inside an opuntia pad, then you absolutely need to report it because that's exactly what it is cactus moth. The adults, we don't identify the adults. It's really hard. You need a microscope and sometimes dissection to kind of figure it out. So don't worry about that. This is what you're looking for, and you're looking for signs. So you're going to find oozing wounds at the spines, like this here and this there, because that's where the larvae entered. Because they're damaging the pad, you can get desiccation, but I'm sure you all know, you've seen this type of desiccation. Lots of stuff causes that. But what you're looking for is inside the pad, the communal group of larvae feeding. And they will just feed, eat out the whole inside. And if they need to, if they're not done, they'll go to the next pad and feed on that one. So that's what you're looking for. You break that open and you see those larvae in there, you definitely need to report it right away. Okay. All right, that's the end of our interactive section. So you don't need to use your worksheet anymore. I'm just going to go through species now. The next one is tropical spiderwort. We're worried about this one. It's not in Texas, but it could be a big problem because it becomes a problem in fields, agricultural fields. That's why it's on our list. In other parts of the country, it's a big problem there. So in the Southeast and in the Southwest in California, and certainly in Hawaii, it's a big problem. So it's not in Texas yet. This is one of those that's not in Texas, and we don't want it in Texas. So here's a field that's overtaken by it. That's why we're worried about it. So it has impacts on nurseries, crop fields. It has become herbicide resistant because it's in fields. Enough herbicide has been used that it's become resistant to that. And it can be host to another crop disease. It is perennial in southern states, so in our area, more northern areas, it can become annual, but it gets quite big, right? It can get up to 3 feet tall. So this here, that field could be almost up to your waist if you're walking through it once it gets big. These are what the leaves look like. So they're ovate to lanceolate elliptical, so they're this shape or more oval shape, either one. But the important thing is that they're about they can be up to 3 inches long. but they're pretty wide as well. So that's what gives them that kind of oval shape. They have an entire margin. They're not, they don't have teeth or anything like that. And hirsute, that just means they're very finely fuzzy on the leaf surface. And this is really important. So here's a leaf, here's the stem. You see the leaf forms a sheath around the stem, and tropical spiderwort has these reddish hairs around there. And our native similar looking species don't have that. So that's a really important mark, okay? Interestingly, they have two types of flowers. One that's called chasmogamous and the other one is cleistogamous. The chasmogamous one is open. Chasm, if you think the chasm and opening, so the flower's open and it looks like exactly what you see here in this picture here. It's aerial, just meaning it's up in the air, right? It's a normal flower. And then for our purposes, what's important is there's these two petals and then a third petal down here, which is white and small. And that notice that these petals are on these long pedicels here, okay? And actually this whole flower here is pretty small. You'll never see the cleistogamous ones because they're subterranean, so they're underground, so you typically will not see them. They look like swollen nodes. And they're called cleistogamous. Cleisto means closed, so they actually never open. They never even open. They self-fertilize. So it has these two reproductive strategies. So what are some of our native lookalikes? Well, first of all, there are two groups, the spiderworts and the dayflowers, that can look like, that can get confused with tropical spiderwort because of the leaf and the growth form and that sort of thing. So as far as spiderworts are concerned, that whole group, this set of species, the typical spiderwort has 3 petals, right? So right away you can tell that's not a tropical spiderwort. So if you see 3 petals, large petals, you can see all 3 large petals, then definitely it's not tropical spiderwort. All right, and then we have the dayflowers. All right, so the typical dayflowers, it's the typical dayflowers that could get confused with a spiderwort. Even though tropical spiderwort is called a spiderwort, this is where it gets confusing, right? Common names. It's actually in a dayflower genus, so it really is a dayflower, even though it's called spiderwort. So this is the type of flower that you're looking for, all right? So 2 prominent petals and a third less prominent petal. This is what we're gonna focus on next. So what are our natives? There are 2 natives that kind of look like our tropical spiderwort. Now, our natives are dayflowers, right? So they have much larger petals, okay? And importantly, they lack the reddish hairs on the sheaths. So here's our tropical spiderwort, and the 2 species that we're looking at are the white-mouthed dayflower and the false dayflower. And again, the thing to look at here are these 2 here, and our natives have linear leaves. You see how long those leaves are? All right, a lot longer. They're not oval. And they're much larger petals. You see how large those petals are compared to these? And they are in short pedicels, not these long pedicels there. And then finally, like I said, they lack the reddish hairs. All right, so that's how you can tell those apart. Okay? All right. Next one. This type of insect, this insect order, you should recognize this already, that this is Coleoptera, or the beetles. This is the red bay ambrosia beetle. This is in your area, so that's why I want you to keep an eye open for it. It attacks laurel trees, and also known to attack these other ones, so red bays. So red bay, any of these species here are part of the Lauraceae, right? So in your area, you got red bay and sassafras, pond spice, pondberry, avocado we're also worried about that one because it's an agricultural crop. So it does cause these problems. Environmentally, red bay, as you know, in your area all the way through the southeast is a really important part of the component of the forests out there. And then the pondberry and pond spice do have are threatened or endangered depending on where they are. So right now it is in Texas, actually a few more counties than what's indicated here. Otherwise, mostly it's out along the Atlantic coast where it was first found. This is what they look like. So they're tiny. They're about as big as Lincoln's beard here on the penny. All right. Dark brown, very nondescript. But what's important here, they have these little pits in them, and then they very short antenna, and then that slope back there, the sloping abdomen back at the end there. Okay. So there are lots of other ambrosia beetles. North America has lots and lots of them. So there are lots of lookalikes that could be looking like this. But for us, the main thing that's easy to look at, besides microscopic stuff that entomologists will look at, is this slope here. So if you find a tiny brown beetle, especially if it's on a red bay or a pond spice or something like that, and has this, then that's what you would want to report. And you would want to try to get a picture of it. That's the hard part. You'd certainly want to save it. The reason it's a problem is it itself does not kill the tree. What it does is it's a farmer. So it carries and inoculates the tree with a fungus, laurel wilt, right? So the larvae actually don't feed on the tree tissue, they feed on the fungus. And it's the fungus that kills the tree, right? So you get leaf wilting and color change that like you see here. Discoloration of the wood. If you cut in the wood or if you move the bark, that discoloration is the fungus itself. And it only takes a few weeks once it's infected for the tree to die. So typically there's nothing you can do, but if you see that, or if you see dead trees, you know, dead pond wood or spice wood or whatever, that pond spice, I guess, or red bays, then you definitely need to report those, okay? All right, so that's the red bay ambrosia beetle. It is in your area. Keep your eyes open, be vigilant, know where a red bay is in your area and kind of keep an eye on it. This is an SBN species that you will manage if you become part of the task force. This is the Japanese climbing fern. So how do you tell this? This is a fern and it is climbing, so it's a vine. Okay. The leaves, this is how you tell it apart or distinguish it. See, those leaves are very fine, finely lacy, and they are on these vine stems that are very thin. They're wire-like. And they can be green if they're young, they turn orange, and then when they're old, they're black. It does cause these problems. One big problem is it acts as ladder fuel for fires. Okay, and these leaves can turn brown. Some of them may persist as green during the wintertime. They will, so basically it dies back and then grows out again, and more vines come out of the ground and it grows up again. Now remember, this is a fern, so there are no flowers. It does produce spores as a fern, and those spores can be carried quite far. These are fronds here. These fronds here are the reproductive ones, so they're producing spores. So they look a little different than these, right? They look different than those. Okay. In fact, these are the sporulating ones here, and these are the normal ones there. So they can look a little different. This is it growing up this big, long, you know, all the way up this tree, this pine tree. So you can see how that can form a ladder. If they dry up during the summertime, then the fire can go right up there into the canopy. And here's some of the younger vines. You can see here that the vines are green, right? The stems are green. Okay, so that is Japanese climbing fern. That's all I have to say about that and how to identify that. The next one is air potato, another vine. This is not an SPN species, but Terry wanted me to cover this because it is one that is part of the, is one of the species that you'll be managing as part of the task force, the air potato. So it is a vine, it's perennial, it tends to be deciduous. The leaves are very large, as you can tell here. Climbing really tall, can climb quite high. The leaves are alternate, up to 8 inches long, right? So they are quite big, they can be quite big. They are heart-shaped, so they're cordate, as you can see here. On long petioles, it's hard to tell in these pictures, but they're, the petioles that are holding them up are long. And prominent veins, right? You see these prominent veins that all come from that central spot, okay? They produce these tubers, which is where it gets its name, air potato. Those are reproductive organs. So they drop off, they sprout into new plants. So if they drop off into a riparian habitat, they get carried downstream. That's one way they're spreading around here. Those tubers can get up to 6 inches big, right? So really big. Similar species, very superficially, smilax or greenbrier, because they also have that kind of veination. And they can have cordate leaves, but they're not cordate leaves that look as heart-shaped as that, and they're much smaller, and they're stiffer. The leaves are stiffer as well. And those of you who work with smilax know that smilax has thorns, right? And this does not have thorns. Air potato does not have thorns. So here again, picture the leaves, hand for size, and then the tubers, the air potato, and then just showing you infestation growing up here. You can see the leaves here. There's a Mustang grape that's in there too, but they're both growing up there. Okay. All right. That is the end of my covering these species. So these are the 12 species that I covered. So recognize that's half of the SPN species. This is what we've covered. Several of them are in Texas already, but some of them are not. So again, we want you to be vigilant for these, keep your eyes open for these, and report them as soon as you think you found them. And again, you don't have to be positive, right? We're not expecting you to be the expert. Japanese climbing fern is on this list. It's one that you'd manage as a task force member. And then other species that you'll manage, as I mentioned, is the air potato vine. But other ones that we don't have time to talk about, but you'll have to learn how to identify if you work on the task force, are these ones. Heavenly bamboo, nothing else looks like heavenly bamboo, nothing else looks like elephant ears. Those are easy to identify. Glossy privet, the two privets, the two ligustrums, those are fairly easy to identify, but there are some natives that you might get those confused with if you weren't paying attention. But again, they're all easy to learn, and Terry can help you learn, or other members of the task force. They're already well versed in this, and they can help you identify these species and taking them out correctly. Okay. All right. And again, you can go to that brochure that Hark put out, or to our website to get more information about these. I'm sorry, not brochure, booklet, to get more information about how to learn how to identify those. And with that, I'd say thank you and good luck. And are there any questions?
We do have a couple of questions, Hans. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, we have one about the longhorn beetle.
Yes.
You said that the way to attack that would be to mulch the infected tree. Is that enough to kill that beetle?
Yes, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to kill the larva, right? So if you mulch it, that means that you're ripping the wood apart, and as long as you're chipping it or mulching it into small enough pieces, yeah, you'll kill them off. So this is what they do up in the Northeast. They cut down the tree and then they run it through a chipper or a mulcher to kill the animal inside. They might treat the tree. You can inject insecticide in the tree. If you want to try to save the tree, you can do that, which is the same thing that we do, for example, for Dutch elm disease. You can do the same thing for emerald ash borer. But typically what you do is you cut down the trees.
Okay. For the Japanese.
Well, let me just put, so, and the reason you have to do that is because you can't spray the tree with insecticide because they're under the bark, right? So the insecticide is not going to get in there and it's not going to kill them. So you have to either use systemic insecticide or you have to cut down the tree and destroy the tree.
Okay. The Japanese climbing fern, when does it spore and when is the best time to pull it?
Oh, pulling it is hard, especially once it gets established, because it has tubers and roots that goes way down. It's a real big chore to get out. So what a lot of people do is they'll cut it so that it all dies up above, and then once it starts to resprout, then they'll spray that's much smaller area, right? Because it's only sprouted in this like small clump, and then you can spray that with the herbicide, and that will get down into the roots and kill the roots too. So if you want to pull it, I don't know if there's a better time than another, other than early in the season, early spring. So if you can pull it out before it starts to produce spores, that's a good thing to do. Or obviously when the soil is moist, it's going to be a whole lot easier to get out. But it really is, once it's established, it's really hard to get out.
Is it better to bag it or burn it?
It's a good question, Terry. It's kind of up to you, because obviously you can't burn it every day of every year, right? You get burn bans and things like that. I would say it'd be better to bag it, because that encloses it right away, and then then any spores that might be there, they're not going to be released as they might be while it's sitting around waiting for you to burn it.
Okay.
If that makes
Okay.
sense.
That does make sense. The air potato tubers. The question I have is whether they should be destroyed or can you mulch or compost them?
I would not compost them because they would probably sprout in your compost. It's like putting a potato in there, right? They're probably going to try to sprout right there. So yeah, they need to be destroyed. It's a good question. How does it destroy them? Terry, I forget. Again, you could bag them and throw them away. They'd end up in the landfill. Eventually they would die in the landfill. You can put them in a garbage bag and leave the garbage bag in the sun for a couple months, right? And wait for them to heat up, dry out, and start decomposing in there or something like that, just to be sure that they are dying out there. They're like a potato, right? And as you know, a potato takes, even if you left a potato out on the sidewalk, it'd take maybe a couple of weeks for it to actually die altogether, dry out and die. So I don't know if that, I hope that helps.
Those are tough things to get rid of. They
Yes.
absolutely are. I had a question about pine beetles. Are they native or invasive?
They are native. Well, there are lots of pine beetles. So the ones that you typically hear about are native, but not all of them. So the answer to your question is, because pine beetle is such a general term,
Yeah.
I'd say yes and no.
Okay. Oh, Terry says that she is muted, and I know Terry, you are not muted. Terry, can you give us some voice, Terry? Here we go. Okay. Someone wrote that they've never had luck growing Nandina, so they're surprised it's on the list. And then someone said they actually have Nandina in their yard that was planted by a landscaper. Should they take it out?
So what I tell people is, yes, you should take it out. And it is a problem in your area. Otherwise, Terry wouldn't be asking me to tell you about it, because it is in the natural areas. It is out there. So it does spread. If you have it in your yard, yes, take it out. And there are native alternatives you can use instead. If you don't want it, and it's a pain in the butt to take out. It's just established. Roots will be deep, and they can kind of spread horizontally too. So it's not easy to get out. But if you don't want to get rid of it, then at least cut the berries off so that the birds don't eat them and spread the seed somewhere else.
So can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. I guess I had to turn my video on to make it work.
Yeah.
So let me talk a little bit about the task force and what we're doing with air potato vine and Japanese climbing fern. When number one, I see that there's a question about getting rid of some air potato vine behind someone's home. We are strictly limited to working on the pathways that have been approved through the Parks and Rec Department. So in the township, you can, on your own, clear up to 3 feet outside your fence line into a public area, but no further without there being specific permission. So if you observe any of the invasives we've talked about or others, use the 311 app on the Woodlands Township to report it where it is. That sends that request through the process that ultimately can get our task force the approval to go there and work. We have to have that first. Can't do it out on your own more than that 3 feet outside your fence line. And when the groups are out there working, especially on things like air potato, everything gets bagged up, sealed up, tied up. And you might notice after a work day that you'll see some of those bags at alongside a road near a pathway, over, and our Parks and Rec guys come out and pick those up at the first chance they get, usually the Monday after a weekend workday, or no later than Tuesday, Wednesday. And so you might observe that those bags even have a little orange sticker that says the volunteers were working, and this is invasive species that they removed. All of that material gets taken to the landfill so that there's no possibility of it getting included in the yard waste that goes to the commercial composter that the township works with. So if you see invasives, report them. You could send me a note if you wish. I'm happy to hear your report about it so I could start the process. But it's really better if you go onto the Woodlands Township -tx.gov website and use the 311 app. That way, it immediately starts that approval process happening, and we get a lot quicker response that whether we are or are not given approval to work there. And you may be surprised to know that there's a lot of the public pathways within the township that are not owned by the township, and that's where the rub comes in. That's why we have to be very careful about where we work. If it's on property owned by some other entity, then we all get shut down from being able to do this work. So another question about air potatoes was about the air potato beetle that is having some success in Florida. And in point of fact, that beetle has been found in the woodlands. And so we're not at this point actively releasing that beetle, but it is here, and we remain hopeful that it may do some good over time in helping us with air potato vine removal. One other question, Hans, that I'm sure Carolyn just hadn't gotten to it yet. Someone was asking about emerald ash borer, and doesn't it also attack fringe trees? And I believe that's true in some areas.
It does. So it has a hard time. Emerald ash borer does attack fringe trees. The fringe tree isn't as badly affected by it because it's not an ash tree. So, and the beetles have a hard time actually reproducing in the tree, but they can harbor the beetles and attack those trees. Yes.
So someone else is asking if they report any of these things on iNaturalist, is that any trigger for action? And correct me if I'm wrong, Hans, but the short answer is no.
The short answer is maybe. So the people who need to know don't have time to monitor iNaturalist. One of my volunteers has set up a project in iNaturalist to try to collect any of the invasives that show up, any on a list, not all the invasives, but a list of invasives, so that it's possible to check that. So every once in a while, somebody may check that and then may report and alert the authorities that this important invasive species has been found. Whereas if you use our reporting system, right away, the authorities get alerted. That's the whole point. So go ahead and, if you want, go ahead and also report it in an iNaturalist. That's actually a good thing to do too. But if you can report it to using our reporting system as well, that would be really good, because then we can get on it right away.
And no, if you report it directly into the Invaders of Texas program, no, the Woodlands 311 does not pick that up. They don't monitor that. This is only if you're looking at a public area within the township that you would go to 311 and directly enter that report there. So yeah, in some cases you may be reporting to 2 or 3 different organizations or entities or websites, but they don't all coordinate together. So it's really important to make sure that the people who need to know about invasives all know about invasives. So take those extra couple of minutes to report to more than one. And yes, so the air potato beetle apparently is a good thing. Apparently is a good thing, and it is here in the Woodlands. We remain hopeful that it will do some good in helping knock down the air potato vine problem. But oh my gosh, the problem is so huge along pathways that it would take a long time. We've got to remain diligent with our task force crew. And again, I want to give a shout out to Kathy Herrick, who has been so committed and so diligent in keeping the volunteers focused on that particular invasives. Yes, they remove others while they're out there, but the air potato vine is a huge problem here. So thanks to Kathy for keeping to work that. If you want to help tomorrow, they're going to try to have a 7 a.m. start time because it's hot. Probably work for only a couple of hours. If you look back at my emails, you should have gotten Kathy's contact information, but send me an email if you did not, and I'll forward it to you again. If you can help tomorrow, let Kathy know, because we do need to limit the size of the work crews. So she might be able to assign you to a little further down a pathway somewhere if more than 10 people want to work. Are there any last questions? Let's see.
I have a couple of ones that
Yes, someone's asking about bamboo. So part of the problem with bamboo in our area is that the river cane we see here that is a runner is a native. And so we're not able to address it. We can only get permission to work on non-native and invasive plants. I get it. I mean, I understand that, especially along some of our waterways, that native river cane is a bit of a problem, but that's not what our task force can work on, unfortunately, because it is a native.
I have a couple of questions that are kind of yes/no questions for Hans. Chinese tallow, invasive?
Oh my goodness, yes.
Muscadine vines, invasive?
No, because they're native.
That's what I thought.
Doesn't mean they're problematic. Like Terry was just saying, the native cane is not an invasive because it's a native, but it doesn't mean it's not problematic. So the same for the muscadines. They're native, and they can definitely overgrow your plants in your garden and your trees and everything. But because they're not native, they're not considered invasive.
Okay.
And for things like the grapevines that are not invasive, so that the task force is not able to work on, the township, if it's within the township, they do have a contract for a specific limited number of days that their contractor, their landscape contractors are allowed to help with vine removal, and they try to concentrate on the ones that we cannot deal with, like the grapevines and some of the others.
Anything else?
Well, a question about kudzu. If it's truly kudzu, yes, it does happen in Texas, and yes, it could be here. If we find it and it's on an approved pathway while the task force is out there, they certainly can remove it. Or if it's growing within 3 feet of your back fence and you back up to a greenway, you can clear up to 3 feet from your back fence.
Which isn't much space.
Which isn't much space and isn't much help, but yes, and put everything in a garbage bag in your trash cart. Don't put it in your yard waste. Do not put it in your yard waste, because that goes to the composter. So we need to let Dr. Landell give us any last words he wishes to share, and thank him for his time. He's been generous with us again today. Please reach out to me. You certainly have my email address by now. reach out to me if you have questions, if you want to get more involved. This program has had better success here in the township than we ever expected. And I'm just so proud of all the volunteers, both master naturalists and township residents. And I want to thank all of you, every one of you, for making the time on a Saturday morning to show up and learn a little bit more about the problems we face and some of the work we're doing. So please contact me if you wish. And Dr. Landell, thank you again. Have you any last words for us?
I do. I have up on the screen contact information. My contact information is there, but you see it's smaller because I'm leaving in 2 weeks. So Ashley Morgan O'Vera's information is there. She is at Sam Houston State University. She is with the Texas Invasive Species Institute, which is where texasinvasives.org is going to be living starting September 1st. So she's the one who will be giving these talks. She and another colleague of hers will be working on that. So that's who you'll be contacting. So if you got any more questions about setting up workshops, trainings, presentations, any other kinds of those kinds of questions, they're the ones to talk to. All right.
Well, we
Thank you,
welcome-
everyone.
Thank
We
you,
welcome
Hans, for
Ashley,
everything.
and thank you again.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Hans.
You're
Bye,
welcome.
everybody. Reach out to me if you wish. Bye-bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you. All the best, Hans, wherever you're going.
I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Jay, I've got it recording, so I'll go ahead and close it up now, and I'll send you the recording.
Thank you.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you all. Thank you.